Welcome everyone back to weekly weather updates, and in today's video we're going to have a look at the latest from the live radar, run through the weather warnings as we have got some rain and wind warnings issued over the next few days. This isn't going to be too disruptive, but in some places we could see a little bit of disruption. We have to look at that in detail on the latest UKV, have a look at the precipitation and the temperature over the next 5 days. We are going to see highly variable conditions. We've got cold air trying to push in from the north, but very mild air under higher pressure still holding on in the south. It doesn't look like either is really going to win out. So for southern areas, more likely to be milder and drier. For northern areas, more likely to be colder and wetter. As we progress, though, into early February, those variations are just going to increase, and there are lots of discrepancies within the models, even as soon as around a week's time. Some runs are producing the -10 isotherm, some, and the majority, I must say, are around the 0 to 5 degree isotherm. So in a week's time, some areas could actually be very cold, and other areas could be very mild. It does look like we're going to be in a real big battleground situation over the next couple of weeks. We're going to see some blocking trying to force some colder air, but the blocking doesn't look like it's strong enough to sustain properly cold conditions, or at least in the next week to 2 weeks, and it means there's a lot of headaches at the moment exactly how the pattern will evolve. And we'll be able to show you with those long range charts exactly what I mean with those big differences we're seeing from some of the runs, and as I said, in that sort of 6 or 7 day time frame. So do remember, if you enjoy the videos, make sure you like and subscribe, and remember to follow me on Twitter as well. The link's in the description. Now, if you start on the live radar, you can see this battleground exemplified today. We've got milder, drier conditions across the southeast, 11, 12 degrees, a bit of drizzle around, but nothing too crazy. You go up towards the Midlands, northern England, and into southern Scotland, and for most of Wales as well. We've got heavy rain, with even some snow on the northern edge over some of the higher ground. And this is because we've got some very cold air in the north. It's essentially created this area of low pressure within generally higher pressure, and given this dumping of rain in northern areas, we even have a rain warning issued, not because we're seeing anything too intense in terms of the precipitation rates. You can see mostly it's light to moderate greens, not too many yellows and oranges in there, which would normally precipitate some exceptionally torrential rain, but it's just the fact that it's relentless and has been there all day and will continue to be there over the coming hours before clearing away into tomorrow. You can see again those temperatures really shown on the latest temperatures from the live radar. Very mild for much of England and Wales. Look at those yellows, 10 to 12 degrees today. You progress slightly further northwards and westwards, down towards the mid to low single digits, and across parts of Scotland already down towards freezing. And that is, as I said, going to be the pattern over the coming days. We've got a big area of high pressure here, keeping us and much of northern and western Europe mild, whereas eastern Europe is going into the freezer, because around that high we are seeing northerly and easterly winds. Again, nothing ridiculous, generally wintertime temperatures, but the contrast is shown very strongly there. If you have a look at the weather warnings, you can see we've got this rain warning issued. It does expire at 5 a.m. tomorrow for much of northern England, pretty much from sort of Liverpool, Manchester, Sheffield, all the way to Hull, northwards, and stopping up towards Newcastle, that general area. Again, it has been extended earlier this morning to include more of eastern Yorkshire, and we are seeing 20 to 30 millimetres widely, up to 40 to 50 millimetres. As I said, it's not because of the exact heavy precipitation. The sort of precipitation rates aren't insane. It's just the fact that it's moderate to heavy for hours on end. That warning does continue into tomorrow, and then we have another warning issued for wind through Wednesday, as we are going to see some strong winds to the north. Again, it's just exemplified the north-south split. High pressure in the south, lower pressure in the north, and that lower pressure is going to be relatively deep, but because of the high further southwards, it does keep the centre of the low much further offshore. The system we could see on Wednesday could be a named storm if it was 50 to 100 miles further southwards. But most of the exceptionally strong winds are staying offshore and just clipping parts of northern Scotland here. And you can see 65 to 75, likely up to 85. So really quite strong, but really only just clipping coastal areas here. Now, if you go over to the UK view, you'll be able to see the precipitation and the temperature over the next 5 days. You can see at the moment that rain slowly clearing, but it does take its time, and eventually will completely clear by around 7-8 a.m, leaving a little bit of drizzle behind through the afternoon. Then kind of in between systems, and most areas are relatively dry, and fresher air does even get into the south there, but by the time it does move in, it's highly moderated. As we progress into Wednesday, we see the next system trying to push in, and that gives the very windy conditions for northern Scotland. You can see the squall line associated with the weather front with that low eventually sweeping in, but look at how quickly it loses intensity as it gets into England and Wales, all because of the higher pressure squeezing the energy out of it. Eventually that clears through, and then we continue to see that contrast, rain and colder conditions further northwards, milder and drier generally further southwards, but there will be bits and bobs of rain around as we head into the weekend. You can see this again shown very well on the upper air temperatures, mild in the southeast, cold in the northwest. That cold air does win out through this evening, but you can see it's highly moderated by tomorrow afternoon, and eventually milder air does take over for all, and then eventually the cold air returns for northern areas with that system on Wednesday, but really stays mostly in the north before getting swept away by another exceptionally mild air mass through Thursday, Friday, before the cold tries to push in once again. So you can just see it is shown extremely well how cold air is not far away, but because of this stubborn high across Europe, it doesn't allow it to push in, and when it does push in, it just gets warmed up as soon as it progresses further southwards than Scotland. If you look at those wind gusts for Wednesday, you can see they are exceptionally strong out in the North Atlantic, but really only impacting northern Scotland. From the looks of this, it could actually be widened because of that squall feature, but that will depend on the next 24 hours of runs to see how quickly the intensity of this low is squeezed out. But the main winds are, of course, the far north of Scotland. Maybe see that yellow warning expanded, and even a risk of this upgrade slightly to even see an amber warning for this system. As I said, if this was 50 to 100 miles further southwards, we'd probably be looking at another named system, looking at the strength and widespread nature of these winds. But the winds do die down quite quickly into Wednesday evening, still strong as they progress southwards, but down towards sort of 40-50 miles per hour, which is nothing out of the ordinary during the winter months. As we progress into the latter part of the week, we do continue to see it more unsettled and colder further northwards, drier and more settled further southwards and eastwards. If we look at those max temperatures, you can see this afternoon temperatures around the 10 to 12 degrees in the southeast, around freezing or slightly above freezing further northwards. Overnight tonight, the cold air will slowly seep in, and for most in the north and the west, it will be a cold night. And for tomorrow, we're more back down to average of 6 to 8 degrees quite widely, but the mild air will be pushing back very quickly. For Wednesday, the final day of January, cold morning, so frosty morning for many across England and Wales, and by the afternoon, we're average to above average, with milder air returning for that squall line and cold front is trying to sweep in from the north. Eventually it does get pushed in, and you can see we do see another chillier morning through Thursday, but then eventually the mild air pushes back in for the weekend, and we're back up potentially towards 12 to even as high as 14 degrees there. So yes, some cold weather around, but nothing more sustained than 24 hours here or there, with generally, especially further southwards, milder air winning out. But as I said, as we head into February, we're still going to see these big variances and big chopping and changing, but we could see more of a colder bias instead of the milder bias we are seeing at the moment. So if we do now head over to the longer range runs and start on the GFS and see what that is showing over the course of the next couple of weeks, you can see at the moment we've got that high pressure further southwards and eastwards, lower pressure further northwards and westwards, in this dividing line between the very mild air to the south and much colder air to the north. Actually, the cold air across Scotland is a little bit chilly, but nothing too crazy. The really cold air is much further northwards across Iceland, coming out of southern Greenland. Now, over the coming days, we'll continue to see this fairly flat westerly with little interludes of cooler, more unsettled air. And that is why we will see that rain trying to drift southwards, but make very little progress. As we head into the weekend start of next week, we do see some attempts at the higher pressure pushing northwards, and there is loads of discrepancy about this period next week. Because, for example, here the GFS does pull in a northerly, not anything too crazy because it is more of a northerly toppler, i.e. the colder air moves in. but then very quickly gets pushed away. So lasts maybe 48 hours at most. Wintry showers, frost, for example, before the milder air comes in under the toppling high. Other runs don't have that amplification at all, and instead stay fairly flat and westy, keeping the status quo. However, beyond that, we do see more and more attempts at building higher pressure further northwards, disturbing the generally flat jet stream. And that's all I can really say about the longer range attempts at disturbing the general flow, because we haven't really got a consensus on exactly what could happen. Not only do we not really know what the overall pattern will be, but runs that are showing blocking, some are showing Greenland highs, some are showing North Atlantic ridges, and the GFS here is showing more of a Euro to Scandinavian high, which would attempt to pull in easterly winds into the longer range. You can see here colder areas getting pushed into Eastern Europe, and this is potentially setting up a very cold pattern for the second half of February if that high got going. But here we stay generally in and around the average mark. So GFS interesting, but doesn't pull off anything too crazy, just kind of hinting at quite a few different patterns really there into the longer range. Now, compared to the GEM, we can see that it's fairly similar over the coming days with a fairly strong westerly flow, and we do see as we head into next week, we see that attempt at amplification, but we don't see much at all. That high pressure doesn't get anywhere northwards because this low stops it. And essentially we stay with what we've got at the moment with a generally flat westerly. Right towards day 10 we see the opposite of the GFS. GFS pushing it towards Scandinavia. Here low pressures towards Scandinavia, high pressures further southwards, and it actually draws up a very strong southerly. The low pressure that we had plunging into Europe is actually plunging into the North Atlantic. So even out to that day 7, day 10 range, huge differences between these runs here, and that is why it's causing quite a few headaches, as you'll see on the ensembles in a minute. Now finally, if we have a look at the ECMWF, very similar over the next few days. As we head into the early part of next week, we do see that attempted amplification, and we do see a little bit of a northerly, but it's more happens in the subsequent days. Instead here, the ECMWF actually builds a bit of Greenland high or Icelandic high. Nothing strong yet, so nothing that could sustain cold weather or sustain a block, but you see that wind does veer in from the north or the northeast, and we see a big dividing line setting up across parts of England and Wales and Republic of Ireland here, with very cold air to the north, very mild air to the south. If we zoom in on the United Kingdom look, you could see at midday, unfortunately we can't actually have a look at that, but if we were able to, we'd likely see temperatures around the freezing mark further northwards and around the 5 to 10 degree mark further southwards, just exemplifying the big dividing lines we could see drawn over the next few days and the next few weeks. And this is again just amplified on the latest ensembles. For London, you can see generally over the next week to 10 days we're around average or above average. In around 7 days' time, you can see some runs do turn us a lot colder. Said the majority keep us slightly milder, but still not out of the question that we see some sort of colder air mass move in. And then in the longer term, we do see quite a few more cold runs, and that's been consistent over the past few days, but still no major consistency on exactly how it will evolve. And we haven't really rooted out any of those majorly milder runs yet either. And you can see generally precipitation increases, which could be a signal that that jet stream is lowering southwards, which regardless of any blocking would generally turn things cooler, with us being more on the colder side of the jet. Whereas at the moment, Scotland, Northern Ireland's on the cold side of the jet, but majority of the British Isles is on the milder side, and that's why we're seeing these very high or persistently mild upper air temperatures. If compared to the ECMWF, it's actually fairly similar, generally around average or above average over the next week to 10 days. Cold runs appearing in around 6 or 7 days' time, but still the majority are average to above average, and then you see that dip more towards average or below average towards the middle of the month. If we look further northwards at Glasgow, for example, it's completely different. Yes, the absolute upper air, or the relative upper air temperatures is more just around the average mark, but the absolute upper air temperatures are more towards that -5 region, meaning that for some areas of Scotland, it could be pretty wintry indeed. You see the 2 metre temperatures here for low-lying areas in Glasgow, 4 or 5 degrees, some getting up towards 10 degrees with milder air masses, others down towards freezing. So over the hills in Scotland, northern England, there could be quite a bit of snow over the next few weeks. And if we do actually have a look at the GFS for Glasgow and have a look at the new snow depth, you can see there are some substantial snow spikes appearing. This one here getting up towards 20 plus centimetres. So the risk of some substantial snow into early February, but it will all depend on those dividing lines, where that cold air moves in, and that will all depend on the positioning of the jets and whether we do see any blocks developing. As we saw from both the GFS and the ECMWF towards that day 10 and beyond range, they both produce blocks. The GFS produces it more towards Scandinavia, the ECMWF produced it more towards Greenland. The fact that we've got that discrepancy not only in the timings, the size of the block, but also the overall location is going to cause big headaches over the coming days, meaning that we've got very low reliability into February. All we can say is there definitely is looking like more colder opportunities, and it looking generally cooler than it is now. We cannot pinpoint it really until we get closer to the time. Probably in the next 5 to 7 days we'll have a much better idea. So anyway, thanks for watching. Hope you have enjoyed. Subscribe if you're new, and I'll see you again for another video soon.